Good day, everyone. Welcome to another module reading to the course Psychology. We have new topic, the social psychology. So we're going to read the module, the introduction to social psychology. I'm just going to turn it on, and that's it. We're going to start the module reading now. Introduction to Social Psychology. In this module, we will get a glimpse of the world of social psychology. We will get to understand why social psychologists stress a particular perspective to view human nature and how their personal values can influence their work in subtle ways. In this module will also emphasize the distinction between correlational and experimental research and the problem with drawing cause and effect conclusion from the former. What is the objectives? Number one, define social psychology and explain what it does. Number two is explain the method that make social psychology a science. Number three is develop a working knowledge the psychologist content domains. Social psychology says that, social psychology defined. Social psychology is operationally defined as the study of how people think, influence, and relate to one another. Though this area of psychology's center of interest is more on people as unique individuals. It emphasizes their differences and focuses further on experimentation, looking at how the population impacts one another, making it distinct from sociology and personality psychology. Social psychology says that number one, we construct our social reality. People by nature irresistibly give their interpretation of everything, like behavior, events, personality, and so on, making them intuitive scientists. We react differently in the same situation because we think differently, thus constructing our own social reality. We tend to explain other people's behavior depending on what suit our daily needs. For example, when you hear a woman commenting negatively on your friend's parenting style, you may infer that this woman has a nasty disposition, and then you try to avoid her. Number two, social intuitions are very influential as they affect a person's perspective, making it dangerous. Our intuitions shape our fears, impressions, and relationship, which makes it common in our lives. In some cases, we intuitively trust our memories more often than we should. We tend to misread our own minds that affect the thing we do. For example, you predict that you will win in bingo, so you use up all your money. This fast judgment leads to perilous outcomes. Our intuition and unconscious information processing are routinely powerful and sometimes perilous. Number three is social influences shape our behavior. No man is an island. and socializing with others is need more than necessity. Conformity is part of connecting with other individuals, which leads people to reform the way they think and act and speak. The enduring behaviors, ideas, attitudes, and tradition shared by a large group of people and transmitted from one generation to the next is referred to as a culture. Ahmad 2008. Culture also plays a significant role when it comes to social influences. For example, our standards on promptness, clothing, and frankness vary without culture. Our attitudes and behavior are shaped by external social forces. Number four, personal attitudes and dispositions also shape our behavior. How we view and deal with things molds our behavior. These are the innate characteristics that make us act differently from other people. Attitude and personality influence behavior. Number five, social behavior is biologically rooted. External forces or situations are not the only factors that affect people's behavior. Scientifically speaking, genes also influence how we act on things, making us what they call biopsychosocial organism. To understand social behavior, we must consider both under the skin or the biological and between skins social influences. Mind and body are one grand system. Stress hormones affect how we feel and act. Social ostracism elevates blood pressure. Social support strengthens the disease fighting immune system. We are biopsychosocial organism. We reflect the interplay of our biological, psychological, and social influences. This is from Mayers 2014. Number six is social psychology's principles are applicable in life. According to Aristotle, people are social animals. Interacting with other individuals is part of our daily routine that make this area of psychology an epitome of life itself. These social psychology concepts will make life easier for an individual who is struggling with discovering oneself, making new friends, being open to others, and etc. Summing up, social psychology's big ideas. Social psychology is the scientific study of how people think about influence and relate to one another. Its central theme includes the following. Number one, how we construe our social worlds. Construe or construct? I don't know. How our social intuitions guide and sometimes deceive us. How our social behavior is shaped by other people, by our attitude and personality, and by our biology. Number four is how social psychology's principles apply to our everyday lives and various other fields of study. Social psychology and human values. Values enter the work of social psychology when researchers choose the topic of their studies. Values are one of the most influential factors in a person's attitude towards life. Social psychology says that there are two possible ways that values enter social psychology. First is the obvious way, which is when a social psychologist conducts a study and reflects the values of the author. What holds important to you? It is education or earning money. Being successful is one's career in one's career or building family life. So, where is it? Where's the question? First is the obvious way, which is the when a social psychologist conducts a study and reflects the value of the author. What holds important to you? It is the education or earning money. It is being successful in one's career or building family life. The value that you are attracted to become evident in research topic that you are interested in. Using social psychological analysis, social psychologists investigate how values form, why they change, and how they influence attitude and action. However, none of that tell us which values are right. Mayors 2014. The second one is the not so obvious way, which is either the social representation involved in a study or the author chosen theories which contain their covert values. Social representation are widely held ideas and values, including assumptions and cultural ideologies. Scientists and philosophers agree that science is not purely objective. It is subjected to the interpretation of nature using one's own mental categories. We tend to view the world according to the lens of our preconceptions. This also makes us realize that the psychologist's own values play an important part in the theories and judgment they support. Psychologists may refer to people as mature and immature, as well adjusted and poorly adjusted, as mentally healthy and or mentally ill. They may talk as if they were stating fact when they are really making value judgment. Examples of value judgment. Number one, defining a good life. Values influence our ideas of the best way to live our lives. For example, personality psychologist Abraham Maslow posited that to become a fulfilled human being, one must become a self actualized person. This is his definition of good life, but it may vary from another psychologist who has a different meaning. Number two is psychological advice may also reflect the advice giver's personal values. When mental health professionals advise us how to get along with our spouse or our co-workers, when child rearing experts tell us how to handle our children, and when some psychologists advocate living free of concerns for others' expectation, they are expressing their personal values. Number three is forming concepts. A psychologist's hidden values may eventually seep into their research-based concepts. For example, Freud's preoccupation with sex and aggression is also his basis for personality concepts. Number four is labeling. It is natural and inevitable that prior belief and values will influence what social psychologists think and write. For example, labeling women as ambitious is a reflection of our values. Social psychologists' values penetrate their work in obvious ways, such as their choice of research topic and the types of people who are attracted to various fields of study. They also do this in subtler ways such as their hidden assumption when forming concepts, choosing labels, and giving advice. Again, they also do this in subtle ways, such as hidden assumption when forming concepts, choosing labels, and giving advice. This penetration of values into science is not a reason to fault social psychology or any other science. That human thinking is a seldom dispassionate is precisely why we need systematic observation and experimentation if we are to check our cherished ideas against reality. It is from Mayor 2014. Common sense. Common sense is usually something that comes after the fact. People tend to pretend that they knew something already when in reality they don't. This phenomenon that we call hindsight bias, also called the I knew it all along phenomenon, creates dilemmas among students of psychology and makes people overestimate their intellectual capacity by masking what they don't know with arrogance. Hindsight bias is a combination of our errors in judging the future's foreseeability and in remembering our past. The I knew it all along phenomenon can have unfortunate consequences. It is conducive to arrogance, an overestimation of our own intellectual power. So, what does this tell us? It is the common sense usually is right after the fact. Therefore, we easily deceive ourselves into thinking that we know and knew more than we do indeed. And that is precisely why we need science to help us sift reality from illusion and genuine prediction from easy hindsight. Mayors 2014. Research method in social psychology. Studies in social psychology help people improve their lives. Their research usually falls under the correlational type of studies that envision possible response by conducting experiments with conditions under control. Once they have conducted in a research study, they explore ways to apply their finding to improve people's everyday lives. Hypothesis testing. Because of social psychologists' unending quest about life, they tend to create many ideas formulated into theories and turn it into an intelligent guess by making testable predictions of what we call hypotheses. A theory is an integrated set of principles that can explain and predict observed events. It summarizes and explains facts. For someone to be able to tell that they have found a useful theory, it must, number one, effectively summarizes many observations and makes clear predictions that we can use to confirm or modify the theory, generate new exploration, and suggest practical application. Correlational research. Social psychology has different kind of studies that can vary from a method wherein correlational and experimental or location, laboratory or field. Research research done in natural real life setting outside the laboratory is referred to as a field research. Laboratory research is an example of research in a controlled situation. Correlation and causation. Correlation is the study of naturally occurring relationship among variables. It usually indicates a relationship, but the relationship is not necessarily one of cause and effect. Correlational research allows us to predict, but it cannot tell us whether changing one variable, such as the social status, will cause changes in another, such as health. This is from Mayor 2014. For example, does the time spent on the internet has an effect on student grades? We might presume that that the more time of students spend on social media, the less time he spent studying. Next is survey research. How do we measure variables like time on social media and time spent studying? We use survey research. Take, for example, political survey. SWS or Pulse Asia would provide useful data on who the politician who score well during the campaign period. It wouldn't be economical to survey all 45 million voters, so what they do is just get a representative of the group. Representativeness indicates how closely the sample reflects the population under study. You might notice that their samples would only range between 1,500 to 3,000 individuals, but the result is attributed to the entire population. This procedure is called random sampling, wherein every person in the population being studied has an equal chance of being included in the survey. Take note that polls do not predict voting. They only describe public opinion at the moment they are taken. Public opinion can shift. Experimental research. Discerning in experimental research is truly one of the toughest part of this kind of study. Social psychologists will need to create everyday scenarios whenever they are reasonable and do not violate any ethical standards. They are just two crucial things when it comes to this kind of research. One is the manipulation of variables, and the second is the random assignment in a group. First is control, manipulating variables. Through manipulation, social psychologists can determine many things by combining different variables that might influence the study they are conducting. Independent variables is an experimental factor that a researcher manipulates. The dependent variable is the variable being measured, so called because it may depend on the independent variable's manipulation. Next is random assignment, the great equalizer. This part of experimental research makes sure that additional factors that might affect the study will be gone and that all people included in the population have a fair chance to be part of the experiment. Random assignment is the process of assigning participants to the condition of an experiment such that all persons have the same chance of being in a given condition. It actually minimizes the differences between groups. Note the distinction between random assignment in experiments and random sampling in surveys. Random assignments help us infer cause and effect. Random sampling helps us generalize to a population. Again, random assignment helps us infer cause and effect. Random sampling helps us generalize to a population. This is from Mayer 2014. The ethics experimentation. Social psychologists have many things to consider when doing an experiment. Most importantly, their study involves strong will and emotion that leave them to go to the areas left unexplored. There are things that researchers dealing with experiments should do. Number one, give the experiments demand characteristic to the participants to give them a background of the study for them to be aware of the research. Number two, ensure informed consent. An ethical principle requiring that research participants should told enough to enable them to choose whether they wish to participate. Number three is is only allowed if needed and justifiable. Be truthful. Number four is make sure participants and bystanders are safe and comfortable. Number five is make every information regarding participants confidential. And number six is at the end of the experiment, debrief participants. Research method in social psychology. Social psychologists systematize their ideas and findings into theories. A good theory will distill an array of facts into a much shorter list of predictive. Again, a good theory will distill an array of facts into a much shorter list of predictive principles. This prediction can either confirm or modify the theory, generate new research, and suggest the practical application. Most social psychological research is either correlational or experimental. Correlational studies, sometimes conducted with systematic survey methods, discern the relationship between variables such as between the amount of education and amount of income. Knowing two things are naturally related is valuable information, but is not a reliable indicator of what is causing what, or whether a third variable is involved. When possible, social psychologists prefer to conduct experiments that explore cause and effect by constructing a miniature reality that is under their control. Experimenter can vary only thing and then another and discover how those things separately or in combination affect behavior. We randomly assign participants to an experimental condition which receive the experimental treatment or to a control condition which does not. We can then attribute any resulting difference between the two conditions to the independent variables, Mayers 2014. In creating experiments, social psychologists sometimes stage situations that engage people's emotions. In doing so, they are obliged to follow professional ethical guidelines such as obtaining people's informed consent, protecting them from harm and fully disclosing any temporary deception afterwards. Laboratory experiments enable social psychologists to test ideas gleaned from life experience and then to apply the principles and finding the real world. So we have here the activities and exercises. Look for one social experiment and summarize the content and procedure done. Number two, indicate the independent variables in study. We have the glossary. Theory, an integrated set of principles that explain and predict observed event. Hypothesis, testable proposition describe a relationship between events. Field research, research done in natural, real-life setting outside the laboratory. Correlational research, the study of naturally occurring relationship among variables. Experimental research, studies that seek clues to cause and effect relationship by manipulating one or more factors, the independent variables, which controlling others or holding them constantly. Independent variables, the experimental factor that the research manipulates. Dependent variable, The variable being measured so-called because it may depend on the manipulation of the independent variables. Random sample. Survey procedure in which every person in the population being studied has an equal chance of inclusion. Informed consent, an ethical principle requiring that research participants be told enough to enable them to choose whether they wish to participate. Debriefing. In social psychology, the post-experimental explanation of a study to its participants. Debriefing usually discloses any deception and often queries participants regarding their understanding and feelings. Deception. In research, an effect by which participants are misinformed or misled about the studies, methods, and purposes. We have the references from Mayers G. 2012 Social Psychology 11th edition by McGraw-Hill Higher Education. Mayers G. 2014 Exploring Social Psychology 7th edition, McGraw-Hill Higher Education, and Ahmad M. 2008 Comprehensive Dictionary of Education. That's all for the introduction to social psychology. I'll see you to the next module reading here in our topic, social psychology. Maraming salamat po at magandang gabi.